Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads. Just to say it's been oppressively hot and humid in London this past couple of weeks. So much so that even the pleasure of sitting in the garden trying to read has become a real challenge, and it's impossible to sleep at night, so you're very tired during the day, and again it's very hard to read long passages of text. But anyway, I've got some books to talk to you about. Andrew Crumey, Mr. Me. Hisham Matar, My Friends. Michael Bible, The Ancient Hours. Charlene Elsby's Violent Faculties. The Summer Layoff by Bucher. Top Doll by McCarthy-Woolf. And finally, Cartesian Sonata by William H. Gass. So I'm going to start with Mr. Me. So Andrew Crumey is a writer I would put under the wing of sort of ideas and philosophy. But I'd only ever read one of his other books before this one. I've sat on this one for a long time, because I had to be in the right space for a book of ideas. But actually, this is a much more pleasurable read than the other one. It's got a much lighter touch in how it deals with ideas and philosophy, and it's funny. It's very, very funny. So there are three interlocking narratives. The first is of a 86-year-old gentleman scholar in Scotland. And by gentleman scholar, I mean he pursues his own associations through text. He's not attached to any university, he's not formally an academic, and he's very cut off from the world. He's never had sex. He has a housekeeper who sort of keeps him body and mind together, because he doesn't know how to cook or shop or do any of that stuff. So that's the first, and he sort of catches wind of this book, an alternative encyclopedia to that of Denis Diderot and Saint-Auban. I can't remember the other guy who wrote the famous dictionary of sort of the Enlightenment and rationalism. And in this contemporaneous but long missing alternative encyclopedia, it's claimed that the guy sort of predicted things like quantum physics and quantum mechanics and probability and all of that long before the turn of the 20th century. So that's the first narrative. The second narrative is back to the time of Voltaire, who was France's most popular writer, but it was difficult revolutionary times, and you had to sort of make sure you stayed on the right side and didn't fall foul of the power. And Voltaire has retreated outside of Paris, and he's very worried that these two new people who've turned up may be government agents or spies, when in fact they're complete chancellors themselves on the run, because they were given this supposed alternative encyclopedia, the original handwritten version, to transcribe, and it goes missing while under their possession, and they managed to find some of it, and one of them had been seeing a female neighbour in the same apartment block, and had accidentally left some papers, some of these pages there, and that he came back to retrieve them and found her murdered. So they skedaddle out of Paris. So that's the second narrative. The third narrative is an actual academic in Edinburgh who is a Marcel Proust expert, and he also has issues with sex, in that he's happily married, I say happily, but he develops this sort of huge crush on one of his students, and is sort of plotting and scheming all sorts of ways to manoeuvre his ways into her affections without alerting any of his sort of professional colleagues or any of the other students, because of course that would be the immediate undoing of him. So you have these three narratives, and they're brilliantly interlocked, and two of the first and the third, and the second to some extent, are very much about, for all these sort of men of ideas and sort of highfalutin sort of brains, they're also obsessed with sex. And the funniest part is the first one, because he is introduced to the internet and sort of rabbit holes and tunnels to disappear down in order to track down this missing encyclopedia. Because the internet is so sort of suffused with sex, he's also introduced to sex, and it is very funny. It's probably of its time. I guess this was written in the 1980s, so whether people would find it funny now or not, it's hard for me to say. But I found it funny, very enjoyable. He's increasingly, and he remains an innocent. He sort of has an idea that this is what sex is, but still sort of manages to stand outside of its ken, outside of comprehending it. And of course, we have the sex of the third storyline of the Proust academic. The analysis of Proust and a remembrance of things past in his sections is really, really good, I would say. And just to talk about this encyclopedia, how it predicted quantum physics, it relays the tale of a man in the Near East who is captured, and the prince who has captured him makes him a wager. And it's a version of the sort of the pea under the 3 cups game. And so he has 3 cups, he has a pea or whatever it was, the actual object, and he's dancing around. It says, if you choose the right one, you'll be spared. If you choose wrongly, you'll be executed. So he asks him which one he thinks it's under, and the guy nominates one. And what the prince does is quite intriguing. He goes to, so he doesn't touch that one that's been nominated. He goes to the other 2 and says, okay, is there one of these you'd like to eliminate? Or is there one of these you'd like to change your prediction to? And he explains that the odds have changed, because before it was 1 chance in 3. By eliminating one of the cups, by turning it over and showing there's no P under that, so you're only left with 2 cups. You'd think it was 50-50 because there's 2 cups left. But actually it isn't. It changes to 2/3, 1/3, because he's already nominated one of the cups, which is sort of the basis of Schrodinger's cat, that, until the cup is lifted and the P is either under it or isn't under it, the P is both under either cup and also not under it. So it's very much sort of the realm of Schrodinger's cat and probability in quantum physics. It's really, really interesting. And the Proust guy is very much fixating on the Proust's maxim of I write novels about the I, not the I, first person singular, but they are not necessarily about myself, because he's talking about that sort of caesura, that gap between pouring yourself into a manuscript as an I, but taking poetic and fictional liberties with it. So this just hit right. At the time I picked it up, it was funny, it was philosophical, so it was sort of stimulating, and I loved it. 5 stars. Hisham Matar, who is an American of Libyan extraction, and this book is about recent Libyan history, starting in the 1980s with when a group of protesters outside the Libyan embassy in London were fired upon by a machine gun that came from within the embassy. So obviously completely flouting all international law and diplomatic law. And 2 of the characters here, who are 18-year-old students who've come down for the demo, are wounded, but the only fatality that day was an actual British WPC, a woman police officer, who was killed. And obviously such a sort of traumatic event stripes both of these guys, these friends, for the whole of their lives. And it takes it up to and through the Libyan revolution in sort of on the tail end of the Arab Spring, when Gaddafi was overthrown and sort of dealt summary justice. And of course Libya has been a sort of failed state ever since. It's a sort of perpetual conflict zone between lots of different militias and groups and stuff. And there are 3 friends. So the 2 who went to the demonstration, and the 3rd, who we only meet halfway through the book, although he's very much sort of trailed because he's a writer, and he wrote a very sort of daring, sort of Kafkaesque piece, which is a sort of a metaphor for Libya under Gaddafi, under totalitarianism, but distant and abstract enough that he wasn't out, directly condemned for it. But all 3 of them are sort of on the run from the regime, from the spies, from secret police, from government. They're all in exile. They all have to look over their shoulder. And that maybe explains the friendships that they have, because as friends, there are a surprising amount of lies and withholding of information that they tell each other. And it's not just to their friends. Like one of the students spins this complete lie to his parents, which he maintains for about 20 years as to why he's not coming home. They feel they can't go back to Libya because then the regime will just sweep them up and torture them. And really, there's more lies than truths in this book. And I get it, you don't know who to trust. Anyone could turn you in and result in the end of your life. So I get the motivation, but I wasn't convinced that this book should be called My Friends, because no one really deep down trusts each other. There are other problems with the book I found. It starts off, it's made up of very short chapters. There's over 100 chapters across 455 pages. So, no more than 4 pages long chapters. And in the beginning, it's very confusing. It's like jump cuts, cinema at its worst. There are all these names thrown at you, but you have no background. You have nothing to root them in. And it's also jumpy across time in the beginning. It does settle down. You do build up a picture, so it doesn't ruin the book. But it was frustrating. And when it occurred in for a little run of pages later on in the book, it frustrated me that it happened again. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are lots of anecdotes and dreams, and I hate dreams in novels, that are sort of thrown in as if they're there to illustrate something, but it's not teased out what they're there for, and sometimes they just seem sort of random and unattached, almost non sequiturs. And what I felt about this book is, because it's based on true events, it's based on the Libyan embassy shooting, it's based on the Libyan civil war and the fate of Gaddafi himself, that all of that sort of facts that you can anchor on if you have any knowledge about them, because you have a sort of, you know about them, you have an understanding of them. Yet the relationship and the narrative side of these individuals that's built up around it, I found a lot less anchoring. I found it a lot more diffuse and unsatisfactory because of that. I don't think he found the right framework for dealing with recent Libyan history. When I think of Gina Apostol's Insurrecto, or when I think of Ed Park's book that I reviewed in my last roundup, and I'll post the link to that, they talk about their own history of the Philippines and Korea, but because they're experimenting with form, it just adds something, it brings something, so you don't get bogged down in, oh, what's true, what's not true. You don't get bogged down in these sort of fictional characters being sort of injected into the history, the real history. And because this didn't take any narrative chances at all, I felt, it didn't work. So I gave it 3 stars. Michael Bible, The Ancient Hours. So this is small and perfectly formed. It's 102 pages. It's a 1-session read. And it's the story of a guy who is attending a church, and one day he basically sets fire to it during a service when everyone's got their eyes shut in prayer. And although he survives, and one other woman who also manages to save a young child, 25 people die in this church. And it's a poly-vocal sort of take on this one incident. And the first thing you think of is that church where the racist guy went in and shot up members of the church community who are all Afro-American. But funnily enough, for a book set in the Deep South with tinges of sort of Gothic, this isn't about race at all, hardly. There is a sort of a dreamlike sequence back to the Civil War and the fate of slaves during the fighting in and around this area in North Carolina. But basically it's not about slavery. The objection that a lot of the people in this sort of rural area of North Carolina have is not to colour, it's to homosexuality, because they're also sort of Bible people, Christians, that their hostility is towards homosexuality. So the voices we get the guy himself, who's on death row. We get the woman who manages to escape and save the life of a 5-year-old, and we get the 5-year-old's voice when he grows up later, having lived through the trauma. and the woman who saved him is a God-fearing, very religious, very devout woman who loses her son in the fire. So she's a very interesting voice. We get the best friend and the girlfriend of the guy who set fire to the church before obviously the event happens. So we get lots of different perspectives, and it's this novel, as I say, it's small and perfectly formed. It's well crafted. It tells a good story, but I felt, as much as I enjoyed it, by the end it was like, okay, on to the next book kind of thing. It's not doing anything radical. It's telling an interesting story. It's telling it well. But as I say, I was slightly intrigued that race, for a book set in the Deep South, the Bible Belt South, there was nothing really about race here, which kind of intrigued me. Anyway, I still thought it was very good. 5 stars. And on to Violent Faculties by Charlene Elsby. So Charlene Elsby is an ex-philosophy academic, and I do wonder whether, as the character in this book who sees the philosophy department shut down for financial reasons, it sort of weighed up against other departments and felt not really to be of the value to spend money on it. I do wonder if that's what happened to Charlene Elsby, or she just quit to become a writer. So of course it's perfectly possible. And so this is an intriguing book. Trigger warnings for body horror to the extreme and out-and-out gore. So what it is the main character, who is initially in post but eventually gets kicked out of the university as the department is going to get closed down. She pursues philosophical investigations in a rather unique and disturbing way. So the question she asks is, what is a human being? Yes, it's the body, it's the anatomy, but because we also have a bit more space around us, you hear the phrase, you're invading my space, or don't get into my face. So a human being is obviously not just their body, but also a certain amount of space around them, a sort of a hinterland or a exclusion zone. So she wants to determine what is the extent, what is the limit, what is the true size, the true dimension of the human body. And she snatches one of her pupils from class, takes her back to her house, and conducts all these horrific and perverse physical experiments to try and determine the space that a human body takes up. Another one is there such a thing as a human soul? And if so, how do you isolate it? So there's a series of these increasingly grotesque and blooded experiments she carries out. And of course the language here reports it as if it's sort of po-faced philosophical investigation, despite the fact it's describing very casually, but in strict academic discipline of experimentation and observation. She's making notes, she's recording the results, so you get this very, as I say, very sort of po-faced narrative about these horrific episodes. So I gave it 4.5 stars. It is very good, but I think you have to have the stomach for it. And on to The Summer Layoff by Matt Bucher, who sent me this completely unprompted. I'd requested from him his first book called The Bell and Deck, which he sent me, and because I'd liked it, I think I gave it 5 stars. He sent me this off his own bat, which I thank you, Matt. But full disclosure to say, this was sent to me by the author, and it very much continues The Bell and Deck. So The Bell and Deck is, and I'll post my link to the fuller review of this, but quickly, it's about a guy who works in a corporation. He works in the AI, sort of writing text, generating text. And the deck refers to the slides of a PowerPoint presentation that he's putting together, which is the whole of that book. And it's very epigrammatic. It's quite David Marksonian in style, more of which anon. And it's really talking about language in terms of corporate business, dead language, AI generated language. And this is, before the ChatGPT really caught on in the last couple of years, against art and soulful language. This is slightly different, although it contains the same character, Bellan. Unfortunately, he's lost his job because his company has been downsized and he's lost his job. Now, he's given a reasonable payoff. So he decides that he's going to take the summer off, not seeking work until sort of autumn time. And he's going to maintain a journal. of his activities, and who knows, maybe that journal will provide a book, because he is still a writer. And again, it's very epigrammatic because he's observing his everyday activities, but also things that come to mind. So just to give you an example of that, here's a sort of a page of stuff. Fetishise long sentences, short sentences, obscure words, 1,000-page novels, shimmering prose, loose fragments, obscure mysteries. I do not care. I want to read it all and sort it out privately. An occasional, no, a rare, glittering passage does not a genius make, wrote David Markson. You don't think it can happen to you, but then it does happen to you. And so then you try to write about how it could happen to anyone. Warn people, but reassure them and yourself that not only will everything be okay, it will be better than okay. The WARN Act, W-A-R-N, was introduced into the Senate by Howard Metzenbaum and signed by Ronald Reagan. Your company reports record net income quarter after quarter. Executive constantly reassure you that the company is sound. The business model is robust. There is a large moat protecting us from potential competition. Basically no debt. Pure cash. 40% margins. Then one day someone posts a rumour on Reddit or a chart on Twitter and there is panic. Turns out the whole company, like every company, is a house of cards. Vulnerable to private equity. Institutional investors withdraw, bonds are downgraded, synergy targets increase to 50%, and now here you sit, home alone. You don't have to care. Scouring biographies of writers and artists and composers that were published after Markson's death, i.e. that David Markson couldn't possibly have included in his own. So this is really a meditation on purpose of life. You know, being a working stiff, being in the sort of corporate web and sort of doing these sort of jobs that don't really offer much satisfaction, they're rather soulless, they're certainly no art or they have their own sort of metrics of imagination and creativity, but they're not ones that we would readily take over the imagination and creativity of making art, for example. And yet, because he sat at home all day, frittering time away, reading, yes, it's ennobling, but equally he's aware that he's not achieving anything, he's not doing anything, he's wasting time to some extent, or he's not maximising time. So the whole time he's trying to do a ledger in his mind of working, having purpose, meeting your responsibilities, because he's married, I think with a kid, paying the mortgage. Now he's got a sort of safety net because of the payoff he got, but at some point that's going to run out. Versus, no, all of that, as I say, is soulless, it's working stiff. The mind and the soul must be able to access greater, more ennobling things. And the whole time he's balancing that. And it doesn't matter, you know, on the one side it's what you think between those two, but it's also how you are judged by others. What's he doing? Why isn't he, you know, doing anything worthwhile with his time? All that sort of thing. There's a break in the book where he goes on a hike to somewhere he's never been before through a sort of thick forest and gets slightly lost. And hooks up with this guy who's a bit shady, a bit sketchy. And it's interesting because that's not epigrammatic, that is straight, you know, descriptive writing and psychological, you know, trying to judge the mental state of this guy who he doesn't fully trust. And it's very different. It's sort of, I sort of found myself impatient wanting to get back to the epigrams and the sort of the meditation stuff. It had a sort of queer effect on me. It sort of dragged me out of what I'd been sort of basking in up to that point. I didn't quite enjoy that section as much, I have to say. Okay, so just to give you a couple more quick epigrams. Artist in residence at his own residence, because he's been laid off, he's working from home. London was first subdivided into 10 postal districts in 1857. By 1930 or earlier, the idea of extending postal district or zone numbering plans beyond large cities to cover even small towns and rural locales was in the air. Some old bullshit, said the Beastie Boys. How many artists died on one side of the George Washington Bridge and were reborn on the other side? Repeating a story is what makes it a story. John Dos Passos and Ernest Hemingway used to read passages from the Bible to each other. So by then we're back into this sort of epigrammatic style. I really enjoyed it. As I said, it's very similar style to the Bell and Deck. You don't have to read one before the other. I mean, this is standalone. I gave it 4.5 stars rather than 5 stars because I felt that Bell and Deck went a bit deeper, because half of this was an inquiry into working stiffness and the lack of satisfaction and soul and all those sorts of things, which perfectly legitimate to consider them, but I didn't feel I learned anything more about it because I felt it myself. I'm an artist who has to work for a living doing a day job, so I didn't get much out of that half of the argument, I have to say, but it's still a very good read. 4.5 stars. And Top Doll by Karen McCarthy-Woolf. So this is one of those books that you can absolutely appreciate its artistry and its skill and its robustness of keeping its style all throughout, but I didn't really enjoy. It's about a woman who is dying. She's she's over 100 years old. She has money, but she's a recluse, and she has really only spent money on acquiring a massive doll collection. And these dolls range from sort of, antique porcelain dolls called beasts, through rag dolls, homemade or handcrafted, through to the Barbies, which are sort of plastic mass-produced. And indeed, the best sort of bits of the book really are the humour of the conflict between the beast dolls, the rag dolls, versus the Barbies, the sort of Joanna Come Lately kind of dolls. And individually, and it's all narrated by the dolls, not by the woman herself. And some of those stories were engaging. So, for example, there's a rag doll who's male, who is sort of made by a plantation slave, and has sort of managed to sort of be passed through history into the contemporary era. He was quite an interesting, because he's talking obviously about sort of colonialism and things like that, but by being male somehow it just struck slightly wrong, slightly off. There's another doll who speaks in Jamaican patois. The author is herself of Jamaican ancestry, and that was something I completely appreciated the language of and the skill and the poetry, but it didn't really have heft for me. So as I say, this is a bit of a mixed bag, this book. I have to say also, I've written a short story about dolls in my collection, Stories We Tell Our Children, because mine, again like this, sort of lists all the different types of dolls, but it adds a new one to the collection, which is the anatomically correct doll that is often used in police interrogations of children who have suffered abuse. So I kind of felt, I don't know when this was written, published, 2024, mine was 2021. So I kind of felt I knew this world. I didn't know the sort of the 104-year-old woman's world, but the world of dolls and expression through dolls and play and other things that are expressed through dolls, such as neurosis or Freudian, whatever. I'd done it myself, so maybe I got less out of this than a lot of people would. So I gave it 3 stars because it is highly skillful and beautifully done. And finally, William H. Gass, Cartesian Sonata and Other Novellas. This is 4 novellas. It's William Gass, so the writing is beautiful. I didn't quite get on with the first story, which is about a clairvoyant and her husband who are constantly at war. And she's sort of his slave, really, even though she has this sort of superpower, I suppose. It's not really a superpower, but you get what I'm saying. Special power. I didn't really get on with that story. But the second story, which is called Bed and Breakfast, is a brilliant, brilliant story. So it's about this accountant who's corrupt and helps businesses basically cook the books. And he travels through, I think it's Ohio, through different places in Ohio. A bit like a travelling salesman, only his goods are cooked books. And so we get the description of this sort of, of the hotels he stays in between, when he's working on a job. And the first one has these sort of random collection of books just there as decoration, but he gets absolutely absorbed into what these books are why this selection, who wrote them, what do they say. And then he moves on to another town, and he finds this motel which is sort of just full of knickknacks and historical gewgaws and all these sorts of things. And it's like he's sort of absolutely captivated. He has to investigate all these objects in his room one by one. And it's about a sort of a material world, as I say, that captivates him. But through that emerges an awakening into spirituality. So through these material objects, which themselves don't really bear much significance, although they all have their historical stories lost in the midst of time, been collected by the woman who runs the motel. But through his obsession in trying to sort of track down their stories, track down the craftsmanship, he is sort of given an awakening, as I say, into spirituality. It's a really, really clever story and beautifully done. The third novella is called Emma Enters a Sentence of Elizabeth Bishop. So Emma is almost a feral child in the upbringing she's given. She's very much left to her own devices, and then her parents are out of the picture anyway, and she's sort of left in this house on a which is a sort of on a farm. She's barely eating anything, she barely looks after herself. But the one thing she did to entertain herself as a younger child was read poetry, particularly the works by people like Emily Bishop, Emily Dickinson, and things like that. So she has her whole world interpreted through, and it's a very limited, restricted world, because she's not really engaging in it much, and it's not been opened up for her by adults. It's all sort of self-discovery, and she does it all through poetry and her relationship through the poems describing scenes of nature which she could maybe see outside her farmhouse window, but she enters it in a sort of poetic, metaphorical way rather than engaging with it in actuality. It's very interesting tension. And then the final is The Master of Secret Revenges, which kind of does what it says on the tin. It's about a prankster who is bullied at school and learns to fight back by playing pranks, decides that the best form of revenge is when people don't know who's pranked them, that's sort of secret and anonymous. And I did sort of have a sort of an up and down relationship to this story. Some of the stuff I thought was really getting to the meat of it, or was entertaining in the nature of the pranks. And other times I felt a bit let down because the pranks were sort of referred to as pranks without sort of the imagination of describing them and stuff. So it's a bit up and down. But overall, you know, it's William Gass, it's fabulous writing, it's quite subtle writing in what it's exposing you to. As I say, the sort of spirituality emanating through, you know, materialist sort of what's the word? Gewgaws. So I gave this 5-star for the quality of the writing, even though I didn't really get with the clairvoyant books. So that's my reading for the last 2 weeks. Just before I go, I just wanted to give you a list of new release books that I'm really looking forward to, that are due to come either June, July or August. The first is already here, which is the Mobius book by Catherine Lacey. She who wrote the autobiography of X, or no, the biography of X, which I enjoyed. As you can see, this is already quite tricksy in that the book sort of falls into two halves, and then when you reach the halfway point, wherever that is, you get that, because so it's like a Mobius strip, you can't see the join kind of thing, and it reverses. I'm not sure how I'm going to approach reading this. I haven't figured that out yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Then there's Nicola Barker. Her new book is called Tony Interrupter. Now, I have a difficult relationship with Nicola Barker. I really respect the idea of what she does, because she is genuinely experimental. She takes formalistic chances, but I've never enjoyed her books, the ones I've read. I mean, her book Happy had so much money thrown at it because of the calligraphy on it and the way it was typeset. And yet, to me, the whole thing read like a book, a young adult book. So frustrating. So after her last novel, I can't remember what it was called, where, interestingly, I think she said on its release that she sort of, there was nowhere else for her to go to in writing, so in a way she'd come back to a much more conventional book in whatever that novel was called. If I can find my review, I'll post a link to it. I hated it. I thought it was terrible. And I sort of swore that I wouldn't read Nicola Barker again. But I saw a review of this, and this really will be the last chance saloon between me and Nicola Barker. If I don't like it, I swear I'm never going to pick up anything of hers again. If I do like it, maybe I will continue with her. I mean, I did find it interesting that she herself had sort of said she'd achieved everything she could do with the prose form of the novel. So is she out of ideas? Anyway, we'll see. The next is Georgy Gospodinov's Death and the Gardener. Of course, his book Time Shelter, I think, won some major literary prize when it came out. But in truth, I've loved all three of Gospodinov's books. I've just something about his style just really straight away mainlines my brain. I really like it. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Then we have a Korean novelist called Kyung-ran Jo. Her novel called Blowfish is due out, I think, August. Obviously the translation, it's been out in Korean. And just the description of it, about two people contemplating suicide, I think by eating poisonous fish, I guess. So it's very much a meditation on suicide. So I'm looking forward to that. Then, of course, Ali Smith's Glyph, which is the follow-up to Glyph. I think that comes out end of October. I am not as zealously devout about Ali Smith as a lot of people on BookTube are, but I do like her. And I will post a link to my review of Glyph, last year's version, where I felt it was fine, but I couldn't really judge it until I read the second one. So I'm in a slightly curious position. I don't have great enthusiasm to buy a hardback version of this book because Ali Smith isn't one of the authors I feel I could justify buying hardback copies at the extra expense. But equally, I need to know how Glyph, the first one, is followed up by Glyph the second, how they interlock, how they speak to each other. So I haven't ordered it yet, but I probably will get to it in time, so when it's published I will have it. And then there's a couple of books that aren't available till next year. Claudia Rankine's new book called Triage, that's due out to 2026, and Erin Vincent's 14 Ways of Looking is due out next, I think, January next year. I'm looking forward to that. I've not read Erin Vincent before, but I'm in conversation with her a lot about books over Twitter. She posts fantastic tweets about books under 200 pages that are really worth reading, which is how I came to Top Doll, even though I didn't particularly enjoy it. But her tastes are impeccable. She's a memoir writer, but she doesn't write straight memoir. And 14 Ways of Looking, I think, gives an idea as to the next memoir is maybe it sounds a bit Rashomon, 14 different perspectives. I don't know, I'm looking forward to it. So I just wanted to relay those books that I'm looking forward to. I will probably read the Mobius book next. I'm currently not reading anything. I just finished the My Friend's book. I'll probably read that next. But I'm looking forward to the others when they finally arrive. And just to say, finally, I will be recording a video of my least 10 favourite reads and giving some brief reasons as to why I hate these books above all others. That'll be my next video after this one. It'll be, I guess, about a week in between the two. So, till next time, thanks very much.